When we read the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, we recognize that the early church always viewed Jesus as a fulfillment of all the Old Testament prophecies. And therefore, very often you will find this line, "This took place in order that the scriptures might be fulfilled." The second thing we know from the early church is that they gave Jesus a title, the title of Christ, which simply means the Anointed One. So now, if Jesus was the fulfillment of all the Old Testament prophecies, and he was called the Anointed One, the Christ, who are the others who are anointed in the Old Testament? Three basic categories: the prophets, the priests, and the kings. Let's focus on the priests. The priests did two important functions. The first is he offered sacrifice. But the question is, why do we need sacrifice? Well, think of it this way. When you do something wrong, it takes a lot out of you to say sorry. You have to swallow your ego. You have to swallow your pride in order to go out to that person and ask for forgiveness. This is the same idea that is used when we think of sacrifices. Sacrifices enable us to take the trouble to go out there and to make an offering that pinches us in order to say sorry to God. And what do sacrifices do? They bring about a genuine reconciliation. And this, my dear brothers and sisters, is what the priest did in the Old Testament. He went and offered sacrifice, and in and through the sacrifice, he brought about reconciliation. But why was this necessary? Simply because he prepared people to adore God. And this is very important. God creates us so that he and I and all of us can be in a right relationship with him. And that really is the meaning of adoration. Adoration comes from the Latin ad ore, which simply means mouth to mouth. That means we stand face to face. That is how the book of the Song of Solomon begins. Kiss me with the kisses from your mouth. And this, my dear brothers and sisters, is what he's talking about. It's a love poem. But what is important is that he invites us to be face to face. It's the song of a soul asking God to enable it to be face to face. This is what the priesthood aims at bringing about adoration, a right way of living with God. The second thing that the priesthood does is bring about reconciliation. And cilia in Latin simply means eyelashes. Concilia simply means that eyelash to eyelash or eyeball to eyeball. Again, re-emphasizing the same point. What does the priesthood do? It enables us through the sacrifices and through reconciliation to stand face to face with God. It brings about a right relationship, the possibility of adoration. We see this in the Old Testament. God does this through the Levitical priesthood. But how did the Levitical priesthood come about? We know the story of the Israelites coming to Mount Sinai and the covenant being made there. And then we have the whole question of the people sinning, bowing before, prostrating themselves before the golden calf. And when Moses comes down, he is angered. And he invites all those who have not sinned to stand up for him and for God. It is only the tribe of Levi who has not prostrated before the golden calf. And so they go about cleansing the camp by striking off the different people who have prostrated before God. And as a reward, they receive the Levitical priesthood. The priesthood which earlier in the Exodus, in the last plague, in the Passover, was celebrated by all the heads of the family, now is reserved to the Levites. As we go forward, my dear brothers and sisters, we recognize that this Levitical priesthood begins to get corrupt, so much so that the prophet Ezekiel, who is a priest and who is in the exile, warns. And what does he warn us? He warns of the collapse of the priesthood and a new priest coming about. And when the new priesthood is restored once again, From the side of the temple will flow blood and water. Does this sound familiar? Yes, it does, because Jesus says, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up. He is the new temple. And when he is on the cross and he gives up his life, when his side is pierced with a lance, what flows out? Blood and water. And this, my dear brothers and sisters, is the journey of the priesthood. The priesthood of how it began, what it was originally, how it got transferred to the Levites, how the Levitical priesthood got corrupted, and how God, through the many prophets, especially Ezekiel, spoke of a renewal of the priesthood, a new temple, and a new way of being in adoration with God. This is where we come to the priesthood of Christ, and we begin to understand what exactly Christ did and how is it that he is a priest.